So I finally made this connection with a very small temple of about 4 devotees in Baltimore. And I lived just 3 blocks away. So what I would do is I would wake up at 3:45 in the morning. And Baltimore's a little bit of a scary city at night. So I would run like a madman through the city of Baltimore to get to the temple. It was a little scary, but once I got there, I felt, great. It was wonderful. It was a very sweet group. Anyway, I heard a few weeks later that Prabhupada was coming to New York, to Henry Street. And they suddenly got that information that day. And so they said we had to drive all night to see Prabhupada during, Mangalarti. So we drove all night. I never really driven all night, but it was fun. It was great. We were excited, and I was excited to meet Prabhupada, and of course see another temple. I hadn't seen another temple, so I went to Henry Street, where Prabhupada was, and of course I had heard so much of Prabhupada. I heard so much of Prabhupada's voice on tapes, cassette tapes back then, and when Prabhupada came into the temple room, I mean, there was, it was a tremendous sort of, it's hard to describe. There was a kind of levity, to it. But while we were all kind of rising, we all went down when he came in. And I was struck at how short Prabhupada was, almost like a head shorter than me. And I'm not that tall, because Prabhupada always seemed so grand, larger than life, And I'm sure I'm not the only one who said this. This is because Prabhupada carried with him so much. The guru means, heavy. So the weight of the tradition, you could feel being carried by Prabhupada. This attracted me a lot because I was here to learn. After all, I was a college student. I was seeking knowledge about yoga. So here, when I saw Prabhupada, I saw, here is a person the likes of whom I had never seen before, someone who carried with him the full weight of a tradition, powerful and beautiful tradition. But here's the thing, the morning classes were in some ways better than the morning walks, because the morning walks, the pathways were not big, so it kind of, I'd be in the 3rd tier of humans behind Prabhupada, so I couldn't hear him so well, But the morning classes were wonderful. Now, I hate to say this, but the reason why the morning and evening classes were so intimate is because, frankly, most of the devotees got sick. Now, my wife at the time had volunteered to go into the kitchen. And she came back after a few hours in the kitchen and said, "We cannot eat this," because the Bengali boys were stomping potatoes on the ground and little worms were going into the food. And of course, later Prabhupada found out about this, and he was very upset with the devotee in charge of this, because Prabhupada noticed there were so few devotees attending class. But of course, that delighted me, because I just felt like I was one of the only few there, But it wasn't like so few. I mean, there were a good 30, 40, devotees, but that's still very small when you spread out and so on. So on the day of Gaura Purnima, I had an experience of really one of the greatest surges of inspiration in my life. Prabhupada, I'm pretty sure he quoted this verse from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Jayatam Surato Pangora, Mama Mandamadergati, Matsaraswapatambojo, Radha Madanamohano. And this so powerfully impacted me, that the lotus feet of Radha Madan Mohan are everything to me. though I am lame and ill-advised and I'm senile. This is Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami speaking. Anyway, Prabhupada was speaking on this on the day of Gaura Purnima. I don't remember if it was the morning or the evening, but I was just transfixed. And of course, I was perfectly healthy. Because once I heard what was being cooked, all I did was drink Dobbs and eat the little bananas. The little tiny bananas are ridiculous. You had to eat about 4 to get an American banana, So I was healthy, and I heard everything. I was alert, unlike most of the devotees. So this was just amazing. It was just marvelous. But that day, I actually felt like leaving and going back to America. Now, why would I want to do that? I was healthy. I was with Prabhupada morning and evening, this holy man like I've never known anywhere. Because I felt so powerfully that Prabhupada has given so much in the books. Not all the books were even out. Back then, just a few volumes of the Bhagavad-gita, but TLC with teachings of Lord Chaitanya were out, and the Krishna books and so on. But I had this great inspiration with Prabhupada's books suddenly, with the books of the Vaishnava tradition. I had a sense, I had a special relationship with the great sacred texts of the Vaishnava tradition from hearing Prabhupada speak on this verse. So I, in a peculiar sort of paradoxical way, I felt like leaving Prabhupada, but in a way gaining more of Prabhupada and the tradition that he brought to the world. Just from that morning, that class. In many ways, moved me into the work that I've been doing up to this very day. Getting my PhD from Harvard and publishing sacred texts. I feel like I'm celebrating that moment. This very moment. During that 1974 Mayapur festival, like I mentioned earlier, it was a small group. It wasn't that many. Bhagavatam class, morning and evening, morning and evening. So Prabhupada was giving a class in the morning, I remember. And I remember he was going on for some time. Prabhupada's classes were generally not that long. He was going on for a while. And the deities, the altar was it? Oh, it was not open. The curtains were not open. But I decided to take my camera down to the other end of the temple room and take a shot of the whole event, the Vyasasana and the devotees there and the beautiful, you could see out the greenery from the different sides of the building. And suddenly Prabhupada stopped class, and I think the curtains opened, and all the devotees got up, and Prabhupada was coming right toward me, and I was right there, and and I'm not a photographer, but I sort of became one. And photographers tend to be obnoxious. I mean, they get in the way, they kind of move around, they disrupt the reality of the situation a lot. Well, I sort of did that. And that's just not like me, So, Vishaka or Yadav, they're better at doing that kind. They have that obnoxious sort of photographic talent. Whereas I just had my little camera and I kept shooting, and Prabhupada was coming right toward me, but he was looking at Radha Madhava. And I was so sort of stunned by being within the vision, the visual range of Krishna to Prabhupada and Prabhupada to Krishna. I was sort of in the middle, and I was experiencing something of the sort that I've never really experienced, something really, truly ecstatic. And then Prabhupada came right up to me. I was in the way, as I mentioned, but between the railing and where Prabhupada, he's supposed to be at the railing. I was at the railing and not quite knowing what to do, and Prabhupada's just still looking at the deity. And then he got down to offer obeisance. And so I did, and Our shoulders were touching. I didn't know whether this was inappropriate or whatever, but all I could tell you is I was thrilled offering, obeisance with Prabhupada, in unison. Really a thrilling moment. The whole thing was thrilling. I know that the other devotees were wondering, why are you there? Who are you? Should you even exist? How dare you get in the way of this extraordinary embodiment of the Vaishnava tradition? During that time when Prabhupada was walking up to Radha Madhava and sort of being within this sort of how do we say in photography, depth of field. I like that term, depth of field. I felt the depth to some degree. I felt the depth. And so much of yoga, as I had been studying all those years, was about being purely transfixed and attentive to the object of meditation on the outside, but internalizing it completely on the inside and being totally absorbed in it everywhere. That's what I felt when Prabhupada was walking up to the deities. I had a taste of samadhi. Not deserving of it, but I snuck into a little bit of samadhi there. I went on a morning walk with Prabhupada. Now, in Dallas, the devotees there had an idea to take Prabhupada to a park, particularly beautiful park. So this would require getting in cars. We didn't just walk out of the temple complex and move along into a park, but we had to get into cars. So Prabhupada was in the first car with devotees. There was a second car, and there was a third car that I squeezed into. And it was dark out. It must have been in the winter or in that vicinity. And we got to the park and we pulled into the parking lot and we got out, and then you had to kind of walk a little bit in to the paths of the park. But there was a gate that was closed and said park closed, open at sunrise and closed at sunset. The devotees who arranged for this were like, my gosh, how are we going to deal with this? And Prabhupada said, no problem. We'll walk up and down on the parking lot. So Prabhupada was so, appreciative and loving toward the devotees that he hardly wanted to make them feel badly for, frankly, not checking it out thoroughly enough. If you're going to take all that time and trouble to get in cars and go to a place, it's good to know whether it's open or not. But, back then there wasn't the internet where you could just check park times and everything is accessible. Where do you call? What do you do? So obviously, no one had checked it out. So there we were, about 20, 25 of us walking up and down a parking lot that would have a little bit of an incline. No one was in the parking lot except for our cars because everyone else was smart enough to know that the park was not open. So we would walk up and down. We'd go up the incline, and then Prabhupada would turn around, and we'd follow him back down. This would go on for 20, 30, 40 minutes. I don't know how long. And Prabhupada would be chanting, and we'd stop and talk sometimes. But the thing about the parking lot is, you heard Prabhupada's cane, because the parking lot was gravelly. So you could hear That's pretty much all you could hear, plus Prabhupada's voice, or the devotees, doing their japa when Prabhupada was not talking. But the event that really stuck out in my mind is how a jogger was coming in the opposite direction. A man, I remember, he was wearing all white, shorts, whites, and he was jogging, and the jogger, who was going slowly, said, "Good morning," looking at Prabhupada. And Prabhupada said, "Good morning to you," something like that. And I remember looking at the devotees who were surprised that Prabhupada didn't say, something like Hare Krishna or, some kind of more sacred greeting of some kind. But what this reminded me of is how Prabhupada was a perfect gentleman. And that was how Prabhupada defined a devotee in that famous news interview down in Gainesville. How can you tell a devotee when you see a devotee? Prabhupada said, you will know by the fact that he is a perfect gentleman. And I'm assuming that he also meant a perfect lady as well. So that was a nice meditation. Back in 1974, back at that first Mayapur festival, the first time when devotees from all around the world came to Mayapur, and the journey was divided up into 2-week portions. First 2 weeks in Mayapur, and then we would all go to Vrindavan, which also was a temple in progress. I mean, the temple, Krishna Balaram temple, was simply, when you went there, it was simply columns rising into the sky of bricks, bricks and mortar. And but Prabhupada's quarters in the back were finished, so Prabhupada would stay there. We stayed a bit of about like a 5-10 minute walk down toward the center of Vrindavan, in a place called Fogel Ashram, on the same side of the street, but about 5-10 minute walk down. So we would all settle there. And it was an ashram that had a kind of atrium open to the sky. And we all, were sleeping everywhere and so on. And I don't know, to this day, I can't even remember how it all worked. Because, I don't even remember where you showered or where you went to the bathroom or anything like that. All the practicals. It's inconceivable to me. That many people in this little ashram. Anyway, how it worked, I have no idea. But every morning, Prabhupada would give class. And then they set up an asana, again, fairly high, in that atrium area, that open area. And it was beautiful. The weather was beautiful and very temperate. And we were under the stars, Prabhupada was giving class. And every morning I would hear Prabhupada. Again, most of the devotees were sick, so it was myself, and at that point, even more devotees were getting sick. And it was only like 15 of us, sort of semicircular around the asana, and well spaced. There's plenty of room. And if you got too close, you couldn't see Prabhupada as well. So you had to be a little spread out. So I was a good, 15, 20 feet from where Prabhupada was sitting. And there was only one person between me and Prabhupada, sort of in my line of vision. And so the class was going on. I remember it was just amazing just to sit there. And I was well. I didn't get sick. And Prabhupada was looking over toward me. And then he looked over toward Brahmananda and said to Brahman, he said, "Brahmananda, what is he doing?" Pointing at me. So I thought, who else could he be pointing? He was literally looking at me, pointing at me. Brahmananda was asked, What is he doing? And Brahmananda looked over. I thought at me, and again, it was dark, so it was a little hard to see how everyone was exactly looking at things. But Brahmananda reported back to Prabhupada when he looked over, said, Prabhupada, he is sleeping. Prabhupada said, go over there to him and tell him to go out, to leave. So Brahmananda, big Brahmananda, is walking over toward me. And I'm like wondering, was I asleep? I'm well, I'm rested. I'm like one of the only people in the whole group that actually can stay awake during class because I did not get sick. And here's Brahmananda coming over to me. While I thought I was listening to Prabhupada's class the whole time, I actually thought there was something wrong with me. And Brahmananda is coming over, he's coming over to me, and then suddenly stops at the person in front of me. Now, I didn't know that he was falling asleep. So suddenly, such great relief came over me that I was not the one to be told to leave. But then again, as I was reflecting a little later, I said, that was a wake-up call. So maybe I wasn't sleep, but maybe I was still asleep in a certain way. I figured that was also meant for me. Wake up, Garuda. Wake up. Hear carefully. Pursue the process of Shravanam very, very carefully. Don't take it for granted, just like it's the first step, and then we can move on to the other 8 steps. No. Shravanam. It's all about Shravanam, hearing. In Philadelphia in 1975, or was it 76? Anyway, somewhere in there, Prabhupada came for Rath Yatra. And it was wonderful. I mean, Prabhupada had many morning walks. I sat in Prabhupada's room for hours, right on the edge of his desk, just a few feet away. And again, I never asked Prabhupada anything. We interacted with eyes, but, I was more observing Prabhupada and the visitors that would come in or be brought in, or the devotees who would come from afar, that kind of thing. It was wonderful. But when Prabhupada first came to Philadelphia, he was interviewed at the airport, the Philadelphia airport. And he was being interviewed by a female reporter with whom Prabhupada had many exchanges back and forth. And he was being questioned about women's participation. And Prabhupada was in his own way, and I was not there at the airport, but I remember being told what had transpired. And apparently the female reporter was left somewhat distraught, dissatisfied with what Prabhupada was saying, and that he appeared to favor men over women, or at least the philosophy did, or something of that nature. When Prabhupada arrived, he first immediately came into the temple to offer respects to the deity. Then he sat on the asana. Now, I was there for that. And I was sitting right within just a few feet of Prabhupada in the asana. And Prabhupada was reflecting back on this interview, and you could tell he wasn't happy with it. And this is my perception. He seemed to feel a little sorry for the way it ended up. And he then wanted to set the record straight. He said, male or female, everyone on the transcendental platform is equal. There is no higher or lower. He said, everyone on the dancing platform. That's what he said. I always thought that was sort of cute, if I may say so, because, you know, in the Western world we have dancing platforms, I think. I don't know because I never danced until I became a devotee. It was the only reason to dance. Before that, there was no reason to dance. So he said on the dancing platform, everyone is equal. Yeah. I admired how Prabhupada felt like he had to sort of recapitulate and reconsider and reflect and maybe redo in some sense. He seemed concerned. Yeah, I liked that. He was thoughtful, deeply thoughtful. I liked that a lot. So in 1975, Prabhupada came to Dallas, Texas, to the temple there on Gurley Street, I think. And back then, the temple room doesn't look anything like it looks now. When Tamal Krishna Goswami took over, I mean, he made it into truly a Vaikuntha atmosphere. Back then, it was what it was, a gym. And the only thing that didn't make it, that told you it was no longer a gym, is that at one end there was an altar. And at the other end, there was a Vyasasana for Prabhupada. It was rather high, too. A little too high in some ways. It seemed awkwardly high. But the rest was very, you know, the rest of the building, the rest of that room was, I mean, it felt like a temple within a gym, a gymnasium. So it was kind of weird. But when Prabhupada came, I remember one evening, Prabhupada gave a class, and the class was very short, and Prabhupada just started chanting the Mahamantra. And it broke out into a kirtan, which didn't usually happen after a class. And this temple room, of course, was rather long. It was a gymnasium. So it's appropriate for running around. Well, in fact, that's what ended up happening. The devotees were so moved by Prabhupada's chanting that they would run down toward Prabhupada, and then they would run all the way across down to the deities, and back and forth it would go. And I was not in the marathon group of runners. I was observing this, and I was just looking at Prabhupada, chanting the Mahamantra, and realized that everything is there. I knew I didn't fully appreciate it, maybe not even very much partially appreciate it at the time, but I could tell there was so much more there for me to gain. And what I learned from that was that I could look forward to extraordinary journeys into the Mahamantra. And indeed, that has happened. I think the most powerful attribute that Prabhupada, you know, that impacted me from Prabhupada, I think was the very palpable sense that here was the embodiment of the parampara that had come together in Prabhupada that would impact the world, but that more specifically would empower me. And unexpectedly, I felt, you know, this power coming into me. Not in a way, I was not one of these devotees who would like to imitate Prabhupada, his mannerisms, his language. No. But rather, he empowered me to be me. Not to be him. Prabhupada is Prabhupada. That position is taken permanently. But that he infused within me the sense that I have a little tiny role here. And he could empower that. And it was about finding my own devotional voice, my own teaching voice. He just, and I have a very different personality than Prabhupada. I'm not bold like Prabhupada was, I'm not maybe as in some ways, Prabhupada could shock people with sometimes what he says. That's really not my personality to shock, But that doesn't matter. He infused in me the power to be more me in relation to Radha and Krishna. I think that's Guru. That's Guru. That's really Guru.
Je anilo premadana karuna prachu